Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Digital Technology Cluster at the University of Salford. We're here with Dr. Mariann Hardey and Dr. Alex Fenton. Hey, Alex, how's it going?
All right, thanks, Andy. This is a highlight of my fortnight, these events, so it's great to see you guys. I'm particularly looking forward to this one. It's a topic that's close to my heart as well, and I think we're extremely lucky to have Mariann with us as well today.
We sure are, and of course, long-time collaborator of many of us at Salford, actually. I think that, I can't remember when we started this sort of working together, Maz, but it's a good number of years ago now.
Is a good number of years ago now, although, you know, still look young.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the filters on the camera that make all the difference, of course.
That's what it is, yes.
And yeah, the topic is really a big one for us at Salford as well. There's lots of people working in digital health, trying to figure out how to use social media as a way of researching kind of a range of different environments. You're working on some stuff as well, aren't you, Alex?
Yeah, that's right. So I've been working on things like the FanFit project for a number of years, where we've been creating fitness apps and wellbeing apps for fans. So working with Salford Red Devils, the rugby league club in Salford, and then some grant funding working with Rangers Football Club. And that's how Maz and I came to meet each other. Actually, I was getting the train back from Glasgow and reading through, doing a bit of a lit review on digital fitness, and up pops Maz's fantastic paper on this topic, and that's hence how I dropped a line and said, "Hey, I really like your paper. Do you want to do some collaborations?" And the rest is history. Here we are.
Yeah, it sure is. And I think that there's so much to talk about in this world. I feel like every day there's some new issue that comes about in relation to digital health and fitness. And it's a bit of a whirlwind. I mean, we've just started the weekend, a small sort of WhatsApp research group looking at TikTok and how that's being used for a variety of ways sort of related to health. And it's grown quite quickly, isn't it, Maz? We've got 40 people now from all over the world.
I was laughing because you said small, and my goodness, within 24 hours we had like worldwide collaborations happening and several Google Docs, and yeah, it's just exploded. That's amazing.
It is, and I think that one of the questions that for me sort of motivated wanting to do that is just, I don't know how to research some of these environments. There's no sort of template to do this kind of work, how to get it through sort of ethics, how to figure out how to conduct any kind of social science research within the platform is really challenging. And at the same time, I think one of the big preoccupations for people working in this field is actually things like safeguarding, and how do you make sure that young people aren't being kind of irreparably damaged by the sort of impacts of these environments. We hear a lot about bullying, about the way in which these pressures to be perfect are visible and apparent within these platforms. And there's kind of no end to it, because we've, especially over the last year, we've been so much in that world. It's just hard to get away from it.
I think that's true. You know, we've been talking about disruptive technologies. We've been propelled, haven't we, to start thinking a little bit more about our fitness and well-being, you know, in lockdown. It's been a massively challenging time for everybody, hasn't it? So things like with FanFit, for example, we've seen a kind of natural progression away from just simply kind of step tracking and looking at physical fitness and thinking about mental health and well-being a bit more holistically, so it's, I think, probably a lot of people have tried out a new wristband or a new app for the first time, as to kill a bit of time, and also just try and help out, because it's been really challenging year, hasn't it, for everybody?
Yeah, it really has. And Joe Wicks, he's still going with his morning PE sessions for the kids, and so it feels like, I've confessed to people that my son and I we do sort of Joe Wicks, but about 3 months ago we realised that Joe says the same things pretty much every time. So now we switched into having a TV screen with Planet Earth on and Joe Wicks on an iPad in front of him, just muted. We watched some great nature documentaries whilst working out, which I think that's disruptive.
Fantastic.
So we've got a good sort of presentation from Maz coming up to talk about her work, and then we'll have a good amount of discussion and hopefully some questions coming in from the channels. We're live on YouTube, Twitter, and another Twitter account, so hopefully we'll see how that affects our audiences. But it's been great to see how many people have been joining and watching the videos afterwards, especially. And I look forward to sort of hearing what you've got to say, Maz, and perhaps we'll switch over to the presentation and jump back in it together again in about 15 minutes. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Cool. Great. Well, I'm going to add your stream into the presentation and we'll hand over to you.
Alrighty, here we go. Okay. So boring slide, which is our heading. So self-tracking is what I'm going to be talking about. I'm an associate professor at Advanced Research Computing, which is ARC at the University of Durham. But here's where we begin. All right, counting steps. So in 1987, I was 6 years old and my father brought home a pedometer. I was captivated by the device, something you wear that counts and collects your steps. It appeared magical to me. As a child, and you can see how happy I am, my 6-year-old self here, I wanted to collect the number of steps to everything that my dad and I did. So 237 steps to my best friend's house. It was 1,256 steps to the local newsagent shop to buy a Beano comic on a Saturday, and then an extra 15 steps to go to the baker's next door for a sticky bun. More than 3,000 slow steps to school, though. During the day, I was clocking up as many steps as I could to compete with myself. This included loops of the playground at break times, leaving my classes early so I could run to my next room and then back again, and then back to the next classroom with my classmates, and finding new ways to walk the long way home. I had become a self-tracking devotee. After taking 3,476 steps to the GP in 2005, I was 24 years old. I was diagnosed with endometriosis and a body riddled with osteoporosis. I was told that it was impossible for me ever to conceive or have children, and at 24 years old, I felt that I had old person's diseases. The diagnosis felt devastating and quite intimidating, and so a new journey with self-tracking began, with me trying to understand 2 chronic conditions and my fit with them, and I was still counting my steps. Luckily, my diagnosis coincided with a period of commercial upswell with new self-tracking products. Daily steps still entertained me, but I wanted to go deeper into my personal data to determine what was wrong and what I could do to change my own health outcome. In 2007, I knew that it was 5,887 steps home from work, that I had 8.2 hours average sleep, and that my period tracker could not predict anything at all about my body. In fact, it was fairly rubbish. As a social scientist, humanities scholar, and a natural enthusiast for all things tech, I'm optimistic about how self-tracking can better prepare us for diagnosis, preventative health methods, and new ways of understanding health data that will save lives. I believe we need education and access to our personal health data in a way that needs to be protected. I believe this will help combat health inequalities, change health behavior to hard-to-reach groups, and hopefully save lives in the future. Consider this: 8 in 10 men would choose to endure an illness rather than seek help. An illness or a condition that takes form is often invisible, interacting with the body, creating minuscule, sometimes devastating changes. We know that health data is useful, and it even entertains us. For example, in the past week, my best ever step day during lockdown was the same as it was 22,707 steps. Hello, cat. The same as walking from Port Isaac to Padstow. How much we weigh, whether there's a pattern to our sleep, whether we stop breathing at night, our diet, our activity, our own personal health map, all give us a sense of what our health data is doing and what it might do in the future. With the growing capabilities of wearable technologies, self-tracking data and self-monitoring, we're beginning to know a lot more about what's happening in our bodies. More than 2 decades ago, Mike Hardey, my lovely dad, began researching and writing about health regimes conducted in the home. He wrote about the doctor in the house, which spoke to a fundamental shift away from health professionals to health habits that were tracked and enacted in the home. Like my diagnosis, self-tracking has changed my sense of health, how I contribute and maintain my own health regime. March 2012, it was 7,856 very fast steps to York Hospital, and my lovely father, then aged 61 years young, very suddenly had died. He was riddled with 5 different types of cancer, and he was the one of the 8 in 10 men who would choose to endure an illness rather than seek help. He was also one of the 39% who let symptoms get past the point where it was possible to help him. Despite my father's enthusiasm for health technologies and my own adoption within our household, this was not a regime that he had applied to himself. But he did see the effect in me. Through simple self-tracking devices, we can literally gauge our body's state and learn aspects of our health landscape without setting foot inside a hospital or a GP practice. Using a self-tracker, we can already receive, AFib signs that might indicate a serious heart condition or a heart attack before it happens. I track my bone mass to monitor my osteoporosis, also track my body temperature, blood oxygen levels, and many other things to cope with endometriosis. It's 14 steps from my home desk to the coffee machine. And this may all sound great. And as a health researcher myself, I'm a great proponent of self-tracking to empower people to take charge of their own health and access information about themselves. But I do worry. I worry where health education sits and where it is going. Will health information become a series of TikToks, for example, to engage and profit of us in entertaining ways? I worry when we'll voluntarily trade our health data for cheaper insurance, commercial discounts for free coffee, the continued free use of our social media, or exchange our health data so we can continue in our jobs, have freedom of travel, and time with our friends. As we emerge out of the pandemic, we know that a global health passport might be a reasonable way to allow international travel. And this will significantly change our definitions around health data privacy, but it also means that we get to hold each other again, which is so important. During the lockdowns, I've been studying how households use self-tracking technology. I've observed how self-tracking impacts users and non-users in the same household. There's an apparent ripple effect from the enthusiastic self-trackers to the non-users. Perhaps we're all equally bored and curious about our health data now, or there's simply nothing else to do, frankly. I hope such ripple effects will help us better understand health at a community rather than an individual level. I'm hopeful the same ripple effects will help us better understand chronic conditions and how we can cope together. I'm hopeful the ripple effects will change behavior of those 8 in 10 men who choose to endure an illness on their own, who won't be on their own anymore, and who will be here tomorrow and in good health. And finally, interesting fact, it was 9 steps to my desk today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maz. That was really, really fascinating. I mean, I think that one of the things that to me is just remarkable about this time in which we're living is really how much we've been doing with digital. It's a kind of, I think it's a sort of unprecedented period of time where we've explored and experimented with new technologies. And I had no idea about some of that personal stuff you talked about. Thanks for sharing that with us, because it's, I think in many respects, a lot of people have a very personal story to tell about their tracking activity, and often it's sort of born out of a desire to transform aspects of their lives in a way that is hoping to enrich it, whether it's by creating a better community of people who they can connect with around positive activities, or whether it's trying to get towards certain changes of their lifestyle that is what they're aiming for. I see lots of people, for example, on Strava, and I see lots of people that are kind of, I think, trying to discover physical activity almost for the first time, and certainly recently in their life, where they may have sort of lost track with physical activity, and these things seem to be a kind of motivation to really hopefully discover an alternative way of living. I don't know, what's your experience, Alex, of tracking? Are you kind of into doing stuff?
Yeah, I've been kind of, we've been doing kind of a lot of working with different groups, Mariann and myself and other colleagues at Salford have been talking to fans and doing various kind of studies from, online social media to focus groups and so forth as well. And it seems that there's lots of different ways in which people use these technologies and lots of different motivators. I mean, Maz, that was an amazing talk, and so short but such a powerful story, and it's really interesting kind of thinking about what motivates different individuals. I mean, obviously everyone's journey is different, isn't it? And the motivators are different, and sometimes they overlap. I think probably for me, I've never really been someone that's really into running and sports and so forth as well, but I also kind of like this sort of counting idea. So over the last few years, working on the FanFit project particularly, I'm I've become a little bit more fascinated with the way that which technology can count things, but it is difficult where we are right now, tracking things consistently, that apart from steps, I mean, even kind of tracking walking and running can be slightly problematic in terms of its accuracy. So there's a whole question around accuracy. But just to answer your question, Andy, I think probably my personal motivator is I set a 10,000 step target a day, and hell or high water, I'm doing that, So that's kind of that's my kind of personal target motivator. But equally, if I with FanFit project, and if you've got the same wristband of somebody, or using a project like FanFit where you're in a group, challenged against a few other people, then a lot of studies show that your motivation goes up quite considerably. So some people are kind of motivated by their own personal target, or in a group with a few people that they know, or a wider group target, or prizes, or digital badges. So I suppose my question for Maz is around that. I mean, we've heard a bit about our motivations, but what do you think, Maz, in terms of what can digital technology motivate people, and how will it motivate people to, be more physically active or take care of their well-being?
I think the magic of technology has always motivated people, but generally that's been with the kind of the tech enthusiasts, the pioneers, if you like. Sorry, my cat is obsessed with eating my microphone. So that's the tail you can see going across. What I found during research in lockdown, so I'm looking specifically at households that have a mixed self-tracking use, a wearable tech use. So you've got really prevalent users, kind of the pioneers of tech, if you like, but also you've got completely non-users and some people who are kind of in between. And certainly the ripple effect that I was talking about is really prevalent concerning how people talk about their health data and what's happening. In the past, my experience when I've researched self-tracking, it's been a very individualized act. Not going so far to say that it's narcissistic, but you kind of get a bit obsessed in the cult of your own data. And you can look at your sleep data and your number of the steps that you've done, and have your weekly reports, and that all looks beautiful as a kind of data entry points. But you wouldn't really talk about that in any kind of open setting unless you're a member of, I don't know, a semi-pro running group or something like that, where naturally those kinds of stats will come up. What's happening during lockdown within households, when there's a dialogue between, prevalent users and non-users, they're starting to open up and talk about, previous health conditions, or why they're doing it, or kind of the motivational factors. And certainly for some of the people I've been speaking to within the household, it's allowed them to have some very difficult conversations around health. So concerns about that they are not, fit enough, and what fitness and health means, and why they would do that, and then tackling that at a household level. So particularly for young people who have moved back in with their parents, and they've had the experience of, living outside the home, but then coming back. Young people tend to be the early technology adopters. So they're using things like Strava, or they've got, an Apple Watch, or whatever it is. It opens up that dialogue with their parents concerning how as a household they can be fitted together. And certainly there are pre-existing conditions which the family didn't know about. Again, it helps support those kinds of conversations in a way that, yes, is scary and worrying, because any concerns about health always is, but in a way that actually becomes a shared experience, a household thing that they can tackle together. So you're not just left with a diagnosis or something going wrong. Actually, you can support each other.
That's really interesting. It's interesting. My son's recently started, wearing a wristband, because he's kind of been off school, and it's interesting, watching how he's doing that. He's set a kind of daily target, but the other day he forgot to take his wristband out. Went for a, running around the field for a while, and then he came back and he had nothing to show for it. So it's a philosophical question, isn't it? Like, does it exist if it doesn't? It's not visualized in an app somewhere. Does it exist? So it's interesting, isn't it, about that, the steps that exist or don't exist. And also I like the idea of these visualizations. Like, I feel really proud when I can look back at the week and it's all orange rather than purple, and I go around trying to show people, look at that, but nobody's interested, So so the idea about joining groups like this and other, private leagues where people are interested, like we saw in Scotland. It was fascinating. People were saying in the focus groups, actually, I'm not that bothered about winning the private league, but what I don't want to do is see that I've slipped down the league and that people will think I'm lazy, So it's that it really depends. Some people are hell bent on winning it, and other people were just like, I just want people to know that I'm active and that I'm okay. And in fact, there was an incident where a guy, he just dropped off the mat of the step league, and it turned out the other participants, other sort of 8 participants, were a bit concerned about him, so they dropped him a line and said, "Oh, how are you doing? You know, you seem to have dropped down the step league." And it turned out he'd broken his leg. They wouldn't have known about that if it wasn't for that, you know. So it's these opportunities to sort of try and self-track and create those little communities and build social capital around that activity, isn't it? I suppose.
I think the interesting thing happening.
Sorry, Maz, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think the interesting thing happening there as well is not only is it building social capital, but it's allowing us to have some quite difficult conversations around health that we haven't been able to have before. One, because we're spending longer at home. 2, we're probably a bit bored, but also 3, because the level of penetration that we have into our own personal health data gives us that more of a kind of sophisticated overview. You know, we're not just tracking steps anymore, although I'm still obsessed with that. You know, we're capturing sleep, blood, you know, blood oxygen levels, ECG rates, you know, whatever it is. We actually have quite a complex and clever picture about ourselves. And it can be devastating when you have a diagnosis, because you're kind of thinking, well, what does that mean? Where do I begin and where does my diagnosis end? So yeah.
How accurate are these things, do you think, Maz? Because I suppose there's a whole debate about step tracking and how accurate that is. Is it more important that is accuracy super important, or is it more accurate that it's consistent? E.g., you know, if I walk 5,000 steps another day and 6,000 another day, it's kind of, there's some consistency there, even if actually it was 4,000 and 5,000. How accurate are these technologies, and have they got a way to go in terms of their accuracy, do you think?
I think if you're a professional athlete, they're not accurate at all. So if you're trying to shave those milliseconds off your time, that really matters to you. I think if you're an everyday user and tech enthusiast, you appreciate the fact that these are very novel and interesting ways to monitor your data. But of course, they don't have as sharp as accuracy as proper professional equipment. There's been some really good tech review blog posts and some YouTube videos concerning researchers looking at the accuracy of ECG data and blood oxygen level data with things like, you know, Y things and the Apple Watch. And what they found is, in isolated incidences, when they're testing the levels and monitoring their bodies, that it's not that accurate. But actually, to give you a kind of a periodic overview, say, for example, over the number of a few weeks or a few months, in terms of, you know, tracking your rates of fitness, that overview is pretty accurate in terms of where you sit within the thresholds. So individual accountability in terms of data points, probably not brilliant in terms of professional equipment, but actually an overall umbrella picture of what your health is like, and where the dips are and where the rises are, pretty accurate actually in terms of the same patterns.
It's interesting. So I suppose if you've got steps, running, blood oxygen, heart rate, sleep tracking, the overall picture is giving you an idea, isn't it? You know, and I see there's a, you know, new kind of apps out at the moment, you know, asking survey questions about your eating habits and you know, various things, which then, you know, visualize that data. And I suppose that holistic, you know, the more data there is, even if some of it's not totally accurate, the holistic picture's a little bit more accurate, or giving you an indication, let's say, that there might be an issue.
Yeah, very much so. I guess the other thing to think about is not just the tipping point for why we use these apps, because they're lovely things to use and they look shiny on our wrists, very nice. But also what are the kind of the tipping points in terms of us not using them? And there's usually, you know, there's a repetitive threshold, there's a bored threshold, there's a it doesn't work threshold. All those kinds of things. I find that really interesting. What plonks people out the other side? Why do we stop doing this? And certainly for me, in terms of food tracking, I find that really boring.
Manual entry.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is. It's manual entry, and I hate it.
And it's fascinating that one of the most popular pieces of content is about food. You know, people can't get enough of food videos. They're constantly engaging with them. And I mean, one thing I wonder is whether, do we know much about how many people are using these in terms of diversity? Because I mean, certainly things like an Apple Watch are at the higher end of a sort of cost spectrum, and I wonder, I guess I always think that how can these technologies be used to address some of the most sort of urgent public health needs? And I think what you've talked about certainly is things that do bring healthier habits into a population, but is is it quite spread across a demographic? Is it typically more affluent people that can afford these that use them? Are there people that are outside of this sort of digital world that aren't getting the benefit really?
I think you're right to raise that concern. The other thing I would have alongside that, before I answer your question, is who is developing the apps. So what R&D teams are involved with that, and what's the level of diversity there? Because certainly less so the case now, but you know, over the past 10 to 15 years that we've had these kinds of technologies, the R&D teams involved tend to be, typically, men working together. And actually a lot of the health apps, particularly now around period tracking and bodies tracking, is about women's bodies. So at what point have women been involved would be a good question, as well as a whole host of other things, concerning age and ethnicity and all the things that we should be concerned about. I think if we would, Apple Watch is a good example. It is an expensive thing to have, but as we found with the smartphone industry, it's not necessarily that it's wealth that determines how popular that item is, because it seemed to be an aspirational and luxury product. Generally, and it's a trendy thing to have, people aren't necessarily denying themselves that. I mean, obviously, in terms of wealth categories, the very, very poor cannot afford it at all. It's technology that is incredibly expensive. And one thing that concerns me is, you and us talking here are in quite a privileged position in terms of our knowledge about health data, our access to it, and what we're doing to it. It's not just having the money to have these technologies, but it's understanding where that data is stored, who has access to it, and what's going to happen in the future that determines, decisions around us. So actually, will our health insurance go up? Will our car insurance go up because of our lifestyles, because of, what our health data says, because our data tracking is saying, well, hey, you get less than 2 hours of sleep, so, you can't be a very good driver, or whatever it is, because those are consequences that are already happening, and I suspect are here to stay and will only amplify further.
That's some really valid points. I think, you've got insurance companies like Vitality at the moment.
Exactly.
Giving you kind of, money, cheaper insurance and so forth as well. But then there's all sort of ethical aspects around that, isn't there? I remember interviewing somebody, and she said that at the end of the month she was a bit tired. She'd give a wristband to the kids and get them to run around, But the whole, digital divide thing is something that we had to put a lot of thought into for the Nesta Healthier Lives funds. Like, well, how are you going to reach? So the principle of the project was, trying to create fitness apps for non-fitness fans, if you will. So baseline, smartphone, of which most fans have, but not all. But we bought in a load of wristbands and a load of Android handsets, like 30 or 40 quid a piece, as a kind of baseline of how it should work. But of course, you're not getting super accurate step tracking for a smartphone, because if you're out for a walk or a run, you won't necessarily have it on you. But it's a start, I suppose, is the idea. And the idea was kind of, creating something in the brand of something that people love, like Rangers Football Club or Salford Red Devils, that they would be more likely to sort of engage with that and the fellow fans and the information than they would be to necessarily go out to a shop and buy a Fitbit, for example. So it's kind of looking at other mechanisms of where we can reach people of different ages, different technical competencies, etc. And actually, we found with the project, there were a lot of older people used it, for example, that haven't necessarily used, any fitness tracking before. So it's almost like aligning with the brand rather than, it feels a bit like if you're going to go out and buy a fitness wristband, you've kind of got to be a fitness enthusiast to a certain extent. So by aligning it with a brand that people like, it becomes the principle is it becomes a bit more accessible. But the whole thing was, the fund was called Healthier Lives Data Fund. The idea of, empowering citizens, through data. And you mentioned Doctor in the House, and does this link with kind of social prescribing and the idea of allowing people, empowering people, if you will?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and you can tell I'm enthusiastic, and I really like these kinds of technologies, playing with them and everything. I think it's fundamentally brilliant. I do have some worries, though, in terms of where this shifts individual responsibility about health and fitness. Oh, there goes my mic. Thank you, Kat. Because, certainly, I'm sure we've all had the experience where, you think, oh, my goodness, I feel really unwell. What are you doing to me, Kat? And you've Googled your symptoms. Bad.
Yes.
You always have some kind of rare disease, I don't know, purple dropsy disease or whatever it is, and you go armed with that information to the doctors and you say, look, my self-diagnosis is this. And so I give that example because what we're starting to do is shift our relationship with health professionals. Those people who have had years of training, gone through medical school, know their stuff, and we're going in with, a handout from Google saying, well, I know better than you. I think there's some tensions there. There's also some tensions around, health responsibility in terms of, well, what we do with a diagnosis and where we go from there in terms of, that initial dialogue with a doctor and taking that back home with us and obviously sharing that with our families. And a lot of this is, I like to think, taking us to a point where we have preventative rather than curing healthcare. So we're nurturing and aware of our own levels of health and fitness, and not getting to the point which unfortunately happened to my father, where you get so ill that there's no way out in terms of those particular conditions that you're riding with for whatever reason, whether you're a stubborn male because you won't go to the GP, or whether you're not taking care of yourself, and obviously those issues need to be addressed too. So it's that fundamental shift in those relationships. What are our relationships with health professionals? What's our access like to them? Would we be happy with having those kinds of interactions through a smartphone app? And I suspect, given the experience over the past year, 18 months, we probably would all agree that hasn't been as bad as we thought it would have been. Actually, it's been okay, but making sure that access is obviously equitable to everyone.
That's just really interesting, the self-diagnosis thing, isn't it? I know my son the other night, he had a bit of a sore throat, so he got onto Google in the middle of the night and started self-diagnosing himself. So it's kind of innate in people, isn't it? But often it ends up being a worse condition than it actually is, doesn't it? But I'm quite interested in this idea of the kind of Google diagnosis. And the opportunities for that as well, because I mean, if you think about Google flu trends and things like that, if we've got people searching for things, could we then make that useful in terms of big data sets and prediction and so forth? So the old adage is Google knows you're pregnant before you do, just by the search patterns that people put in there. So I suppose there's opportunity to kind of think about Web 3.0 and the idea of the semantic web or artificial intelligence, understand it, making sense out of all these searches and trying to make predictions. But equally, are we on a trajectory towards? We've seen how fragile the NHS is. If we continue on a trajectory of people not looking after their health, will we reach a point where the NHS can't cope?
I'm pausing because I kind of feel like we're already at that point.
I think so. For me, that sort of goes back to a bit about what these sessions are really trying to get us to think about, and that's disruptive technology. And I think we had a question on our Twitter stream a couple of days ago where someone said they don't want disruptive technology; they want technology to behave and to function and to work. And I think, and obviously, I think when we talk about disruptive technology, we're trying to talk about ways in which established sort of systems that aren't adequate in a variety of ways may actually be transformed by innovation cultures, by sort of DIY biotechnologies, and those are the things that perhaps provide alternative solutions, especially for communities where what currently exists isn't solving the problem. I suppose that is, like you say, a little bit where we are already, Maz. Healthcare, whilst it definitely do a great deal more with a lot more funding, there's still probably a kind of upper limit beyond which there needs to be sort of radical technological solutionism to actually address those growing needs. And maybe that is the reality that we have to come to terms with.
I'm interested as well. I didn't realise that stat about the 8 out of 10 men. In some ways, it doesn't surprise me. But what opportunities do you think, or what should we be thinking about in terms of we talked quite a bit about sort of physical, tracking physical features and step tracking, but what about the sort of mental health and well-being side of things as well? Like what opportunities, what should we be looking at, and what should we be doing in terms of using these technologies to help people, address these issues and think about mental health and well-being as well?
I guess one of the challenges is that we make it normal to talk about mental health, because usually we don't. It's sort of an adjunct to, you know, how you look and how you feel in your own kind of corporeal body, basically. It feels like an afterthought. I mean, if the past year has taught us anything, it's that mental health is critical. And obviously physiology and your mental well-being are intimately linked. You cannot extract the two. One of the apps that I've used, which I really underuse, but I know is really beneficial, is a mindful app that just takes you through a breathing exercise. And it sounds silly, but having an app tell you when to breathe and actually doing it does help. But it's that thing of finding time, and it's only a 10-minute app. It's finding those 10 minutes where you can disconnect yourself, concentrate on that one thing and do it. And time just feels, you know, compressed and stretched at the moment. At the same time, it feels like there's no ability to kind of integrate those kind of habits into our daily lives, because our daily lives at the moment are so disrupted, for want of a better word. And the other kind of, you know, mapping exercise apps that I think really help. So I was talking about how the food apps annoy me because you have to do manual entries, and frankly, it's really boring. But another one that I found really helpful that does require some manual entry, but it is mostly tick boxes, is something like the chronic pain diary. So you can go through and just register, you know, when you're experiencing chronic pain. And for me, that's really helped, because I've been able to go to my GP and say, look, you diagnosed me with this condition. I know what it is on a piece of paper, but here's my lived experience of it. So here, armed with this, is a stronger narrative about now what my needs might be in terms of, you know, home working or in a professional life or whatever it is that they are able to help me with. So rather than going to your GP, you know, with a diagnosis and kind of, it means a little bit, but doesn't really tell you very much, having that lived experience and that level of detail there is in some ways reassuring, as much as it is reassuring. Alex, you were talking about looking at your own step count. So I know that I've done my 10,000 steps today, and haha, I'm brilliant. But it gives you that threshold. You're checking in with yourself, and it's that checking in with yourself that's really important. So yes, physical step counts, great. Sleep tracking and all that, all very interesting. But actually time and space around mental health and acknowledging that and making that a priority, probably more than your physical health, is perhaps where we need to go next in terms of these kinds of apps and what they can help us do. And yeah, a simple one which just allows you to breathe in and out, which sounds really boring, but works, because it gives you that time and that space and that energy to do it, is sort of, I guess, interesting to start playing around with.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that, actually. It's an interesting angle, thinking on those lines, I think. But it's just like, we're so busy, everyone's so busy, just simply that reminder or that time and space and the idea of kind of good content that allows you to do that. But these things are harder to, you know, manual input, people don't keep it up. So I suppose it's got to be a tick box or a quick push alert asking you a quick question, hasn't it? Otherwise people switch off. So it's, you know, I suppose the app's only as good as the data it collects, but equally I hadn't thought about that, just creating time and space or a bit more of a routine. So for me, the time when I do steps can vary completely, but as long as I get there in the end, there's 10,000 been done at the end of the day, it makes sure I block out enough time to do that as a kind of a personal challenge, doesn't it, I suppose? So that I hadn't quite thought of it like that, just creating time and space to, you know, think about physical activity or mental health and well-being is another opportunity for digital as well, I guess.
Yeah, and we started this session talking about motivations. So, I mean, alongside that, one of the motivations is that you're in competition with yourself with the steps. But also, if you are doing something, you know, the equivalent of a pain diary, whatever it is, it's a bit more labor intensive. And yes, it is manual and clunky at the moment. I'm sure it will get more sophisticated as these technologies do. But one motivating factor might be, well, what am I going to do with this? If it's simply just recording stuff about you, that gets boring pretty quickly. But if it's recording stuff about you, to be able to go to your GP to say, look, I need help on these levels, and that helps you in your professional life, your home life, just in your sense of well-being, your everyday life, to get the support that you need. That's the motivating factor that will keep you on that task, will enable you to be able to keep doing that, you know, manual boring stuff. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I just had one more kind of slightly tech question, but it's kind of the approach we've used on FanFit so far. You kind of describe as user-centered design, working surveys, focus groups, interviews, ethnography, working with fans. And actually, we said to fans, what have you got out of using the project? What would you add to it if you could? And often the answers are around the social aspects, motivating through, working in a community, building a community, etc. And you say, well, what do you want out of the app next? And it does what we need. What would be nice actually is a chat function or a bit more interaction with the players. And it's always those social elements, but equally, there are some really interesting examples of sort of gamification and other technologies that are starting to creep into these types of projects, like augmented reality or virtual reality or AI or other technologies. So where do you, this is a question for both of you actually, where do you see these apps going in the future in terms of the, what technologies might be implemented to make these even more engaging or track better data or give better, more accurate recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I can go for that first. I suppose for me, one of the things I remember Simon Stevens, CEO of NHS England, a couple of years ago, essentially said that the NHS cannot continue without integrating artificial intelligence into the system. And I think it sort of speaks to the fact that we are a kind of growing and aging population, and that the challenges are just getting bigger and bigger. And I suppose in that respect, that's a sort of green light as to how we do that. And I remember the WHO launched their digital health work last year, which was sort of first effort to think about how you could engage with an avatar to nudge you towards better behaviours. But I think there's still, for me, a huge gap. I mean, I guess I'd want to know more, but my impression is that it's still very much, you sort of mentioned it, Alex, already, that we'll use an app and take it to the doctor. And despite sort of years of the NHS sort of exploring mobile apps, I don't know that they're being used a great deal in sort of prescribing people to sort of self-monitor and track as part of sort of healthcare. Is that your understanding, Maz?
I think there's a few small pilot experimental studies that are starting to do that. I think the other thing is that we have a current cohort of medical students who, to my knowledge, don't receive any training around, social media apps, their content creation, or indeed what users are doing with them. So they get some sociology in terms of patient discourse as to how to interact with sick people, which is good, but not how to interact with people through apps, or indeed, what might be the kinds of dialogues or data that people feel safe within those apps. So I think part of this is about skills training and education on the side of, professional practitioners. And not just the new guys going in, but well-established practitioners within those spaces who maybe feel less confident or, perhaps are using them in different ways. As much as it is closing those gaps around, because some uses of AI within health are just really, really naff. So I don't know if you've seen, but there's a fitness mirror you can buy in Japan that gives you like an avatar AI reflection of yourself to kind of work out to. It's a bit creepy. I don't know why you want to do that. Maybe I'm missing something here, but so I mean, the technology's, witty and good in terms of an example of how far we can get with AI at the moment and far of the state of the art. That's fantastic. But actual health applications and using that and the legacy of that, I think we're still a little bit far away from it. Yeah.
But how do we get there, I guess? How do we get the health sector to think about these sorts of solutions? Because it's odd, really, when you think about how present these applications are in people's lives, and yet they're still sort of separate from how the healthcare service is really supporting people in making the most of them. It feels like there should be a kind of overnight solution to actually making that connection so that there is greater oversight, greater encouragement, and of course greater sort of tuition as well for people. I think there are lots of populations that don't quite figure out how to do this and therefore aren't benefiting from the technology. So we're nearly out of time, Alex. We're sort of pretty much at the end of our 45 minutes. That was a real whirlwind of just so many things. And I think, again, it's sort of food for thought, as all of these sessions are, about what is disruptive technology and how how so crucial it is that a lot of what we talk about is a sort of community aspect of it. So when Maz was talking about fitness tracking in the family, there's that kind of dialogue that's created by the technology that's such a rich part of the experience. And so rather than, we often sort of think about the mobile phone as this sort of personal private device, but tracking seems to kind of open up a kind of communal space where people do feel they can have conversations that they haven't had before, which is remarkable.
And also, it seems, there's a lot of ethical challenges to consider, isn't there, going forward as well, in terms of, who's, designing and developing these things, who are they being tested with? So in terms of, developing and, useful and accurate technologies, then there needs to be more voices involved in the design and creation of these things as well, doesn't there? So we're making, useful technology basically, rather than useless or inaccurate, I suppose. And that's an evolutionary process, isn't it?
I think you're right. I think we need to move away from the entertainment side of health tracking to actually, degrees of accuracy that can start to help to diagnose individuals. That will be the game changer. And then taking that into the home and sustaining health and fitness at home will be incredible. Hopefully, we'll, have healthier, longer lives with the people we loved. That's the main thing.
Definitely, that's a good message to end that discussion on. I'm definitely going to be watching back this recording as well, though, because again we've covered loads of interesting ground, haven't we? There, and we'll be talking about this for a long while, I think. So thanks so much for that, Mariann. It's a really interesting presentation and a great discussion as well, I think. So I hope everybody listening's enjoyed that as well. And I just wanted to mention as well, before we wrap up, around the next session, because these are fortnightly events. So in the next one, we've got Dan is joining us, talking about artificial intelligence, diversity, and the future of work as well. So I'm really looking forward to that one in 2 weeks on the 17th of March as well. And we'll probably pick up on some of these discussions as a recurring point as well, around ethics and artificial intelligence as well. So thanks very much, guys. Another brilliant session.
Sure was. Thanks, Matt, and hope to see you soon.
See you later,
guys.
All right, Penny the Cat. Bye.